Hello and welcome to this workshop webinar on talking to your child about their diagnosis. This webinar has been developed and recorded by the HSE Developmental and ASD Psychology Service in Carlow, Kilkenny. Before we begin, I would like to run through a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will last for approximately 1 hour, and it is suggested that you take a break to move and stretch halfway through. You are also free to pause the webinar at any stage if you would like. The beginning of each new section is marked by a blue slide, which might be a good place to pause if necessary. Please make sure that you have a pen and paper to hand if you want to take down any notes or the names of any resources that are mentioned in this presentation. And finally, if you have any technical difficulties watching this webinar, please contact the service in Bethany House if you live in the Carlow catchment area, or Kilcreen Children's Services if you live in the Kilkenny catchment area. In today's webinar, we're going to take a look at the introduction to this topic, the benefits of sharing this information, when to begin this conversation, how to start, the important points to discuss, the importance of celebrating diversity, follow-up topics, how to help your child develop self-advocacy, and finally, useful resources. For many parents, the decision to share news of a diagnosis with their child is a difficult one, and this can be an emotional topic. When we're working with parents, they frequently express fears that their child will feel different, that they might become sad or angry when they hear this news, that they won't understand or will perhaps use this information as an excuse. But research shows us that many adults who are not told about their diagnosis until later in life have expressed confusion, frustration, and a sense of being let down. And they have reported that these emotions cause more distress for them than being informed of their diagnosis. The author Luke Jackson, who wrote the book Freaks, Geeks and Asperger's Syndrome, A User Guide to Adolescence, discussed how he felt when he had heard the news of his diagnosis. He said, "I had finally found the reason why other people classed me as weird. It was not just because I was clumsy or stupid. My heart lightened instantly, and the constant nagging that accompanied me all my life, not my mum, stopped immediately. I finally knew why I felt different, why I felt as if I was a freak, why I didn't seem to fit in. Even better, it was not my fault. I can't stress enough how bugged I was to discover my Asperger's syndrome at least 5 years after I was actually diagnosed. Mum could have saved me a lot of years of worry because I always knew I was different." And this sense of finally having the answer to an unspoken question is raised by many adults when talking about their diagnosis, and particularly adults who are on the autism spectrum. And I think Luke really helps to represent what it feels like to hear the news for the first time. That sense of relief about finally having the missing piece to the puzzle. When we consider the benefits of sharing this information, the aim of having this conversation is that you help your child to develop a healthy and realistic self-concept and self-esteem. That you're helping your child to understand their own personal strengths as well as their areas of difficulty, which will help to develop awareness and acceptance. Because news of a diagnosis helps a child or a young person understand why they find something more difficult or why they have a strength in a particular area, rather than represent a personal failing or weakness. And this helps a child or a young adult to externalise their difficulties. In sharing this news, you're also helping your child to understand the challenges that come with their diagnosis, what they need to overcome these challenges, and how to go about getting what they need. This means that they are able to advocate for themselves, and self-advocacy is an essential way of developing autonomy and independence. When we look at these goals together, it's really about helping your child to understand and respect themselves. And this is really, really important as it forms the basis of future well-being and successful relationships. When to begin? Ultimately, there's no right or wrong age at when you should begin to have this conversation, but the earlier you start, the better. Because ideally, information on individual difference should be provided from a very young age, and then new information relating to the diagnosis can then be drip-fed every so often. However, when to talk about the diagnosis itself is really dependent on your own personal circumstances. You'll make that decision based on your child's personality, their ability to understand the information, their level of social awareness, and your family's personal circumstances. Some children are told when they're very young, before they're aware of their personal differences, while others are told when they're older and might have a clearer understanding of what a diagnosis means to them. Adolescence is a time when peers and the need to fit in become more important, So hearing about a diagnosis at this stage might be a little bit more difficult. So where possible, you might want to take the opportunity to have this conversation before your child enters adolescence, so they're starting secondary school fully aware of their diagnosis and they're using this information to help develop their sense of self. However, for many of you listening today, this might not be an option, as we know that lots of young people only undergo a diagnostic assessment at this stage. That's no problem. It's perfectly okay. The steps that we advise in this webinar are just as applicable to families who are having conversations at this stage. You might be looking out for signs of readiness for this conversation in your child, and you might find that if your child is showing awareness of their difference, if they're expressing frustration about things that they find difficult, or showing confusion about why they think or act differently from other people and peers, this can often be an indication that the time is right to start this process. For children who are verbal, questions such as, why can't I be like everyone else? Why am I in a special class or school? What is wrong with everyone? May be indicators that they're finding it difficult to understand their experiences without knowing about their diagnosis. How to begin? There really is no right or wrong way to share the news of a diagnosis. What is important is that you begin with minimal information that can be expanded over time, and that you explain this information in a way that is meaningful for your child. So you might consider using visuals, a social story, whatever format you think your child will most benefit from. It is absolutely dependent on how you communicate as a family and your own personal style for sharing news. But as a general rule, it is a good idea to avoid, what we would all know as the big talk, I suppose, because it can convey a sense of seriousness and perhaps sadness, as that's typically the way we break tough news. But also a big talk involves an awful lot of language which might be difficult for your child or young person to process all at once. So just take your time, take it nice and slow, and ensure that the information you're giving is adapted to your child's language needs and their developmental level. And these are the important points we'd like you to include in this discussion. That you start talking about differences, strengths and individuality. That you take a calm and reassuring approach. That you reframe what would have been termed problems or areas of need and show how they're areas of strength for your child. Make sure that your child sees, hears and learns about other people with additional needs. And use books, videos, podcasts, blogs, whatever form of media your child enjoys to show representation of this diagnosis. So you can start by setting a positive tone about individual difference in the family. Writing a list of family members' strengths and areas of need can be really helpful and can give you an opportunity to discuss your child's strengths and areas of need. And visuals again can be used to support this. So when you feel that you've given a lot of time to discussing how everyone is different, everyone has strengths and everyone has areas that they find a little bit more difficult, you can explain that there is a name to describe their particular patterns of strengths and areas that they find difficult, and that this is called whatever the diagnosis may be. It's important that you provide clear information relating to the diagnosis after it's been named. reframe what you might have been told are areas of difficulty or deficits and show how these are areas of strength. So, for example, how your child's restricted interests are actually an area of wonderful interest that your child shows expertise in. And really ensure that you're providing a very, very positive account of this. Remind your child of all the areas in which you and others need some extra help, so that your child can see that everyone finds certain things more difficult, that this diagnosis isn't what makes them special or different, that everyone is special or different. Ensure that you're constantly drawing focus to all of the strengths and positive qualities associated with this diagnosis which you see in your child. Their honesty, their charm, their sense of social justice, all the things that make your child wonderful and all the reasons why you celebrate your child. A good rule of thumb is to provide 3 strengths to every challenge or area that might be a little bit more difficult, so that you're really delivering a positive message and your child is very focused on the strengths they have arising from this diagnosis. It's important to allow space to discuss this topic, so address any specific questions honestly and openly as appropriate to their developmental level. And if you don't have an answer to a question, that's quite all right. Tell them you don't know, or that we can look it up together, or you can find out this information over time. Encourage your child to come back to you with questions, and also encourage your child to seek more information from websites, books, or advance. And where possible, vet this information or perhaps give them a list of useful resources they can consult. It's really important to allow a lot of space and time for this discussion. Your child might want to process this information and might come back to you with questions and queries. Some children might have questions right at that moment, and some children might not want to discuss it again, for really quite a long time or if ever. And that's perfectly okay. Just make sure that your child knows that you're there to answer any questions they have, if they have any. And that this diagnosis is just one part of who they are, what makes them who they are and what makes them special. It's important that throughout this process you're managing your own emotions, that you're remaining calm and upbeat, because your child will take their lead from you as to how they should feel about this news and their diagnosis. So if you're delivering this information in a very calm, everyday routine manner, that's how they will take this information on board. And that's easier said than done. And I appreciate that you might not feel ready to deliver this information in a calm and upbeat manner. So if you're concerned about this, maybe try to practice this with someone else, or role play it, or chat it out with yourself when you're driving in the car. If you feel that you might not be able to have this conversation, that's okay. Perhaps this is a sign that you could do with a little bit more support before taking this on. So reach out to your support network and gather support from them before taking this step. I just want to touch on language very briefly before we move on to the new section. There are lots and lots of different terminology associated with certain diagnoses. So if we take autism, for example, we see the terms autistic, on the spectrum, has autism, Asperger's syndrome, ASD, ASC, so many terms being used. And it's hard to know which term is best for your child. Person-first language is where a person's name is used before their diagnosis. So for example, John has ASD. Identity-first language is where a person's diagnosis is used before their name. So for example, an autistic child. There are lots and lots of different views on which terminology is more appropriate, and different support groups will advocate for different terms. You don't need to make a decision about which term to use. What's important for you is that you explain all the different terms to your child in whatever form they're most comfortable with, and allow them to decide what term they would like to use. This might take some time, and they might change their minds quite regularly about this, and that's absolutely okay. Follow their lead and use the terminology that they have chosen. It's important after we've shared news of a diagnosis with a child or a young person that we celebrate diversity and difference so that they understand that what they're experiencing is not rare, that it is celebrated and championed everywhere they look. And it's a really, really important thing to provide positive examples of representation, so positive role models who celebrate their diagnosis. So you might wish to explore books which feature characters with a diagnosis or diagnoses, which is geared towards your child's age and developmental stage. You might prefer to watch TV programmes featuring characters with additional needs, so for example Sesame Street, Pablo, The A Word, or Atypical for older children or teenagers. Or you might wish to help your child to access blogs, websites, TED Talks or podcasts that explore differences in diagnoses. I beg your pardon. If we take a look at how diversity is celebrated in the media, we see lots of examples everywhere we look. If we take a look at the top left, Talia Grant is a Hollyoaks actress who has Asperger's syndrome. Beside Talia is a picture of R.J. Mitt, who's an actor on Breaking Bad with a diagnosis of cerebral palsy. Sarah Gordy then is an actress with Down syndrome who starred in Upstairs Downstairs, Holby City, Doctors and Call the Midwife. On the bottom left we have Rosie Jones, who's a comedian with CP. We then have Daniel Radcliffe, who of course is the star of Harry Potter, who has dyspraxia. And we then have Lauren Potter, who was an actress on Glee. Lauren Potter is also an advocate and comedian, and she was nominated to the President's Committee for People with Intellectual Disabilities by Barack Obama in 2011 and served as an advisor to the White House. If we take a look at a new slide, we have Anne Hegarty, who some of you might recognise as the governess on The Chase, who is diagnosed with ASD whilst in her 40s. And beside Anne, we have Francesca Martinez, a well-known comedian with CP. And Florence Welch, the lead singer of Florence and the Machine, who has diagnoses of dyspraxia and dyslexia. On the bottom left, we have Adam Hills, who's an Australian comedian and TV presenter who has a congenital physical disability and uses prostheses. Beside Adam, we have Pablo Pineda, who is a Spanish actor and an advocate for people with Down syndrome. He's both a teaching diploma and a BA in educational psychology. And beside Pablo, we have Dan Aykroyd, who's the star of Ghostbusters and Blues Brothers and all the classic 80s hits, who has Tourette syndrome. Again, continuing with the representation of diversity in the media, we have Jamie Brewer, who's an actress on American Horror Story. She's also a Broadway actress, and Jamie has a diagnosis of Down syndrome. We then have Lawrence Clark, who's a comedian with CP. Daryl Hannah, who's the star of Kill Bill and Splash and Blade Runner, who's an actress with ASD. At the bottom left, we have Lee Ridley, who performs under the name Lost Voice Guy. And Lee is a stand-up comedian who is non-verbal as a result of his CP and uses a communication device in his comedy acts. Beside Lee, we have Steve Day, who is a comedian with hearing impairment. And besides Steve, we have Alex Brooker, a TV presenter and comedian who has a physical disability. And the list goes on and on and on. And I'm sure your child will find far cooler examples of people in the entertainment world who champion their disabilities than perhaps the number of movie stars from the 80s that I have found. But it's just important to encourage your child to explore how differences are represented and championed by those who have a large platform. Outside of the entertainment world, we have well-known activists and advocates such as Temple Grandin, who many of you might know is an advocate in the autistic community, Joanne O'Riordan, who many of you will recognise from Irish media, Adam Harris, the founder of As I Am, Greta Thunberg, who is the climate change activist, Angela Bashiller, who is a city councillor in Spain who has a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and Sinead Burke, who you might recognise as going under the name of Minnie Melange, who is a Vogue cover star and activist and really, really well known for championing this cause. In terms of TV programmes and books, we also have a huge number of examples of positive representation in the media. We have Julia, a character who has autism, who has been in Sesame Street since April 2017. The A Word is a BBC drama television series, and the series follows a 5-year-old boy and how his family cope with the revelation that he has autism. Pablo, which is a TV programme with an all-autistic cast and writers, and it's a particularly lovely show. And what we see in the show is that when life becomes challenging for Pablo, he uses his magic crayons to bring to life his animal friends, so Wren, Noah, Llama, Tang, Mouse and Giraffe. And each of his friends represents an autistic trait and an aspect of Pablo's personality, and they help Pablo to think through the challenge facing him, and it's a particularly nice show. At the bottom left, we have Something Special, which was a CBeebies programme specifically for children with additional needs, and box sets of this series are available online. We also have the book The Curious Instinct of the Dog in the Night Time, which has also been adapted for the stage, and the main character of this book is on the autism spectrum. And finally, at the bottom right of the screen, we have Jennifer Cook O'Toole, who is an American author and speaker. Jennifer is quite well known for her Asperkid series of books, as well as her Speaking Geek multimedia series, both of which are aimed at educating people from the perspective of someone with Asperger's syndrome or autism. Jennifer herself was diagnosed with Asperger's in 2011, just after her children received similar diagnoses. There are a range of other TV programmes celebrating individual differences such as speechless or atypical, as well as books, podcasts, TED Talks, websites that you and your child might find interesting and relevant to you. If, however, you find that you're not able to find a programme or a book or a blog that is relevant to your child, then feel free to create your own resource, such as a social story. And use this social story to explain your child and their needs and all of their strengths to themselves, if you feel that you don't have any other relevant resources available to you. So follow up. It's important in the period of time following this discussion, this sharing of the news about a diagnosis, to try to promote your child's level of self-awareness. Encourage them to think about what it is that others like about them, what they're good at, what kind of person they are, who they admire or want to be like, what it is about someone they admire that they like, what are the things they find difficult. You might find that your child or young person might not like this or might not be able to engage in this, might not be able to provide answers to the questions that you're asking them. So help them out by providing these answers to these questions yourself. Because in doing this piece of work, by engaging in this topic, you're helping your child to understand themselves and helping them to establish their identity. If it's appropriate, you might ask your child to complete an All About Me book or folder where they, write down or record or take pictures of what they're good at, who are their families and friends, what are the things that they like and they don't like, what have they accomplished and achieved, what are the places they've visited, what kind of a person they are. And then you can put in a section around what it is they find challenging. So in completing this book, your child is being helped to develop a positive yet realistic sense of themselves. And what we're always looking to do with approaches like this is ensure that strengths outweigh and sandwich needs. And if your child is struggling with this, help them to identify what they're good at and what it is that you love them for. So if you consider this kind of like a personal scrapbook where you include pictures and notes and you celebrate key moments, and it could be a project that you do with your child. It's also important at this time to work side by side on self-esteem, to ensure that your child is being helped to develop a really positive sense of self. And you can do this by creating experiences in which your child can experience success and celebrate that success, and then try to push slightly beyond these boundaries so that your child is being challenged to achieve their potential. It's important to be specific with the praise that you give, as well as maybe constructive, maybe not criticism, but constructive feedback about what they're doing. Be careful about the information that is shared within earshot of your child. And like all children and young adults, they may not hear you when you're calling them for dinner, but they are very, very aware of information that is shared about them, around them. So don't be afraid to tell people not to talk about certain things in front of your child. Even professionals, there is no problem with saying, I need to discuss a topic with you on your own. When you inform your child of their diagnosis, it would also be important to explain this news to your child's siblings in the same way, if you can. And if you can avoid telling your child's siblings before your child themselves, then that would be really beneficial, as research would show us that children or young people often express annoyance or upset at their siblings learning about their diagnosis before them. So if you can, it would be a good idea to try to avoid this, but this may not always be possible. So in sharing news with siblings, take the same approach and take a look around at the resources that are available to support you. And there are a number of books and TED Talks and podcasts available in relation to this. It's just important to vet this material to make sure that it matches your child's developmental level. And self-advocacy. And self-advocacy is really the goal of why it is we share this news. We're sharing this news of a diagnosis to help your child to understand themselves, so that they can understand what it is they find really easy and what their strengths are, but also what they find difficult, what challenges them and what they need in order to overcome those challenges. So self-advocacy is the ability to articulate in whatever form one's needs and make informed decisions about the support necessary to meet those needs. In order to advocate for themselves, however, a person needs to know what it is they find challenging. And this can be difficult, and it's a lifelong process. And the process of developing self-advocacy skills really begin when your child first learns about their diagnosis. I suppose to know what you need to succeed is dependent on knowing what you find difficult. So that is why that connection is so strong. And in terms of developing self-advocacy, it's about setting small goals for your child to encourage them to become more independent. Teach them all the different ways that they can access support if needed. Liaise closely with your child's school so that they can share these goals and approaches, so that together you're taking a united approach to helping your child become as independent as they can. I think this quote really, really sums it up very well. How will we ever educate others or assist them in their understanding if we don't disclose to them? We need to start by acknowledging self to ourselves. Then we can begin to acknowledge self to others. Accepting who I am, warts and all, is the best gift I can give to myself and to others. Self-confidence can only reign well in a culture of self-acceptance. And that's a quote by Dr. Wen Lawson, who's quite a well-known psychologist, and Wen has a diagnosis of ASD. And what Wen is really, really talking about there is that knowing about yourself and understanding yourself is a gift. And it's a gift that you can give to your child. And it's a gift that will help them to make sense of the world in front of them and what they need from the world in order to succeed and to thrive. If following the end of this webinar you still haven't made up your mind about whether to share your child's diagnosis with them, that's no problem. You might find that making a list of the pros and cons of sharing this news will help to guide your decision. And what you can do is discuss that list with someone close to you who also knows your child, and together you can come to a balanced decision that you feel comfortable with. You might also find it beneficial to talk to other parents about their experiences and to discuss the impact that it had on their children. So perhaps you might be in a parent support group and know someone who has children maybe a little bit older than your child, and it might be a good idea to reach out and to see if they've had that conversation, what worked well, what impact it had, just as a means of helping you to decide what to do. And finally, we're just going to take a quick look at some resources that are available to you to give to your child to help with this. So there are a number of advocacy organisations in Ireland that you might want to point your child in the direction of to help get more information and to really make them feel more empowered. So at the top left we have As I Am, which is an organisation for anyone involved in the autism community in Ireland, from children and young people themselves to parents, grandparents, family members, teachers and the wider community. It is really an excellent source of practical and accessible information, resources and guidance. We also have Paralympics Ireland, which is a sporting organisation for athletes with a physical or functional difficulty or impairment. Paralympics Ireland also participate in Dare to Believe, which is a school activation programme that encourages active participation in sport, and they engage with schools and go on visits to schools. We also have Cerebral Palsy Sport Ireland, which provides sporting opportunities such as athletics, cycling, soccer, swimming to children and young people with CP and other physical difficulties. It also provides children and young people lots of opportunities, lots of natural opportunities to meet with others their own age who have similar diagnoses. Down Syndrome Ireland have a resource section for young people with Down syndrome, which includes a downloadable book, Down Syndrome, What is it all about? This is a really good resource to check out before you decide to discuss a diagnosis with your child, as it provides you with clear, accessible information relating to commonly asked questions. If appropriate, you could read through this book with your child when you've discussed the diagnosis. Special Olympics Ireland is a sporting organisation for children and young people with intellectual disabilities. Special Olympics Ireland is available for anyone aged 4+ and runs a range of sporting events such as bowling, swimming, athletics, table tennis, as well as being a great way of meeting other children and young people. There are also a range of other organisations available in Ireland which haven't been mentioned here, and the website specialneedsparents.ie gives a full list of national support groups which you might like to take a look at, or you might like to direct your child towards for more information. With regard to book lists, there are a wide range of resources available relating to autism that are divided into different sections. There are books for siblings, for parents, for children and young people themselves. And the National Autistic Society, which is a British organisation, has a very, very good list of appropriate books that they have divided into age-relevant recommendations, as well as a list of other resources that are available. Jessica Kingsley Publishers also have a range of books relating to autism. They're a specialist autism publisher. So they have books that are available for reading with your child, and also books that would be appropriate for siblings as well. So that's a very good resource to check out. This book, The Little Book of Autism FAQs, How to Talk with Your Child About Their Diagnosis and Conversation and Other Conversations, has been mentioned a couple of stages throughout this webinar, is a really, really excellent resource. And that is available from Eason's and Amazon, and I'm sure you could link with your local library as well to see if it's available through there. We also have a very good PDF called Welcome to the Autistic Community, which is a PDF that is targeted at young people, I suppose, children in their early teenage years and onwards, about their diagnosis and what it means for them. And it's a really great resource that's available on that link at the bottom for free. We also have book lists relating to other diagnoses such as CP and Down syndrome available from Scope Charity. And Within the developmental and ASD psychology services, we also have tip sheets about how to talk to your child about their diagnosis, and book lists available on request. So if you would like any information guides relating to this, if you would like to ring the Children's Services Centre in Bethany House if you're in the Carlow catchment area, or in the Kilcreen Children's Services Centre if you're in the Kilkenny catchment area, and request that a copy of these tip sheets be sent out to you, that's no problem at all. And finally, I would just like to say a sincere thanks for your time and attention throughout this webinar. I hope it has been informative. Thank you.